Hey fig tree growers, it's Mike here and I'm back with another video, and today we're wrapping up fig trees for the winter. I have a really cool video. I'm going to show you guys how to wrap a really big tree, a medium-sized tree, and a first-year small tree. So let's jump right into this thing. So it's December here in New Jersey, zone 6B, central Jersey, and it is winter. As you can see, the garden is closed up. I'm wearing some heavier clothing. It's about 44 degrees out today, which is not bad for December, but it gets down to 5 degrees, sometimes in the negatives, Fahrenheit for all you Canadian folks. So what we have to do is wrap our fig trees in the winter. And the reason is because fig trees can tolerate, some varieties are cold hardy, others are not, but they can tolerate down to about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Once you start getting into those low 20s, high teens, multiple days and evenings in a row, that's where fig trees can run into some problems and you could see some dieback to the ground. Now most fig trees, I'll say most because there are some Mediterranean varieties that just cannot survive in the winter at all, but most hardy varieties that you see in North America can survive a really cold winter. It's just they die down to the ground and then you don't necessarily get great fruit that next year. The key is to wrap the tree, winterize it, so that come spring, your new growth starts growing right off the branches, and then you could potentially get a Breba crop and definitely get a main crop and eat some figs that year. So here in New Jersey, it doesn't start getting really cold down into the teens and the negative degrees Fahrenheit until around January, February, March-ish. So we're in the beginning of December. We've gotten down to the high 20s, some really good frost. All of the deciduous trees, meaning the trees that go dormant in the winter, have lost all of their leaves. They dropped them and everything is sleeping now. So that also includes our fig tree, which is the perfect time to wrap it and close it up for the season. All right, so now that we got all the basics taken care of, and if you're a fig tree grower, you probably know most of this stuff and you're here to see me wrap this tree. So let's start wrapping. I'll show you guys what I like to do in terms of pruning and then wrapping the tree. So let's get over there and do that. All right, so some of the basics of pruning is what we're looking for branches that are crossing each other or not growing outward toward the sunlight. We don't want any branching growing into the tree because that is ultimately just going to cause clustering inside of the tree. It prevents airflow. It's not going to see sunlight. It'll never develop figs, and we just don't want that. So what we want is figs, and we want a healthy tree, and that is essentially cutting a lot out of the middle, allowing for light penetration, and then also making sure branches are growing out and up toward the sun. So when we're actually selecting a branch to prune, like let's just say this is the branch we want to get rid of, we want to make sure we're selecting the area to cut so that the node will grow out toward the sun. So this is a great example here, is this thing right here. That's the node. There's a leaf at the bottom, and the top is actually a new bud where a branch will grow. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're picking nodes that are facing out toward the sun. We're not going to pick a node. Here's a good example. Let me give you guys a better view here. We're not going to pick a node like this one, because this, if we cut right above it, will grow a branch going in toward the tree, and that's exactly what we don't want. And if you notice, most of the branches on my tree are growing out toward the sun, and there's very little that are growing toward the center of the tree. Now, I can't control what grows during the growing season, so that's why we're coming in today and we're just doing some spot checking and removing some branches that did pop up and grow toward the middle. All right, so I selected this branch here only because it's growing in the right direction, but I want to shorten it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate the node that I want to grow out, which is right here, and I'm just very simply going to go on top of that node and just kind of cut the branch right off, just like that. And now what I'm left with is this whole branch has a fig on it, so I'll cut that off, and this beautiful top right here, which is what is going to be our prime cutting material that's going to become a brand new fig tree. Now we'll save the propagation for another video. I'll go deep into that coming this spring when I'm ready to propagate, but I'll just lightly go over how to prepare your cuttings to go into a dormant state for the spring at the end of this video. So stick around to catch some of that. So let's jump right in and clean this tree up. All right, so that went pretty smooth. We went around, we took basically the whole top right off of it. I kind of found a nice level about shoulder height to me of where I wanted to bring all of the branches down, and I kind of just followed that guide around the whole tree, making everything uniform in height. So I did leave a long leader just to show you guys what the average height was and what it is now. And I thought it looked kind of funny, but I'm gonna end up taking it down, and then this will all get wrapped up together. So if you notice down in the bottom of the tree there's a lot of like little wispy leaders and little suckers or sap suckers, if some people call them, coming from the root system of that tree. Now if this is your tree and you're only in this to grow figs and get a bunch of figs and eat figs, then you should totally prune those out of the bottom and dispose of those, because they're only going to take energy from your root system and they're never going to see daylight to grow figs of their own. So prune all that out. Now in my case, I'm leaving those on just so that when we come back into the spring and all of that new energy is surging from the root system, it's going to send a lot of energy to those leaders, those little suckers. I then prune them out in the spring and beginning of summer, and I propagate them as green wood to make more fig trees in the growing season. So that's why I'm leaving them on. I'm going to wrap them up with the tree, so in the spring they're ready for me to prune them at that point. All right, so we got the tree to where we want it to be in terms of height and pruned up so that it'll tie together nice and tight. Now this is a really big tree, guys. This is not a common tree, more of a bush. Now it's not easy to wrap this thing, so what you need to use is rope, and what I have is just some really heavy duty rope. You guys don't necessarily need to use anything like this. 550 paracord is fine, or even just some cheap mason string, something like that. You just want to be careful that when you're tying it, you're not cutting the branches with the rope. Like, you're not doing a lot of pulling where it's going to saw and damage the bark, thus leaving it open for infection or pest problems in the future. So just make sure you don't do that, but any rope is fine. We're really just tying it nice and tight and trying to kind of wrap it up like an umbrella. All right, so if you did a better job than me, then good job, because this isn't the best. But the point of it is just to kind of bring in a lot of the branches, just to give it like a rounded structure, so that it's easier to put the burlap and then the tarp on. So I'm gonna call that good. I'm happy with that. It's not the best, but it's also a very wide tree with lots of branches. So let's move on to the next step. All right, so the next step to this is wrapping the tree with burlap. Now, you want to use burlap, and you could use bubble wrap or painter's tarp or some kind of insulative layer. Now the key to this is just keeping the ice off of the branches. So if you just laid a tarp over top of this thing, which in most cases is fine, what could happen is snow and ice can sit on that tarp, and if the branch is right underneath that tarp, you're essentially not doing anything. The ice and the freezing cold is just going to pass right through that tarp and lay on the branch as if the tarp wasn't even there. So by adding a light layer of burlap, an insulative layer, it just keeps one more layer of that snow and ice from actually touching or making contact with the branch itself. The key is to protect the branch from the ice, not necessarily just the cold air. So let's add this burlap layer, and you'll see I'm not critical with this. There's going to be gaps and branches will be poking through. The key is just we're creating that buffer. That's all we're doing. All right, so I'm going to call that good. Like I said, guys, it's not a critical step. What I do is I mainly do this on the top portion where snow and ice would tend to sit, right? Like if you can imagine when it snows out, right, the snow's coming down, where is the ice and the snow gonna lay on this tree? It's gonna lay on the point of the sloping area, not where it drops off at the bottom. There'll be very little ice and snow that builds up and sits on the tarp down here. It's gonna mainly lay on top of the tarp, on top of the tree, and that's essentially what I'm just kind of creating a little buffer layer for that. So I go all the way around, and I leave the middle open. We want good ventilation. We don't necessarily want to clog that up and make that you know, full of burlap and stuff. So that's really it. And again, you guys can skip this step if you want, but I do it just to be careful. So you never know what type of a winter's coming ahead of us. Final stop to this thing is the tarp. Now I have a really big tarp here because I have a really big tree, and we want to make sure we wrap the tree completely with the tarp. So we don't want any snow or ice, and we want to leave some on the bottom. Let me show you guys how I wrap it. Now I'm wrapping the bottom first, and then I'll overlap the top with the extra tarp so that any rain and snow doesn't run into the tree, it runs off the tree. Okay, so this is going pretty well here. As you can see, the tree wrapped up pretty nicely, and now you can kind of see why I put the burlap where I did. You can see the sloping here. If you're gonna get any snow or ice, it's gonna lay here. It's not gonna lay down on this part. So by putting the burlap up on the top, we're just giving it that extra insulative layer to prevent the ice from kind of just freezing right through the tarp. And on the back side here, as you can see, the tarp wasn't quite big enough, so I just did like a zipper pattern or a lace pattern with the rope to tie it in as close as I can. And I'll take the tarp that's over there and I'll lay it right over top. So let's do that. So that tarp went on pretty easy. Just goes right over top, covers up that hole, and that kind of that where the two ends didn't meet together, covers all that up with some extra on the bottom there. Now I'm taking an extra rope and I'm just going around the tarps just to secure it so the wind doesn't blow the thing off and it ends up on my neighbor's roof or something. That's the fig tree all wrapped up. It's in good shape. I'm happy with that. It looks good. But now there's one more thing that I like to do, and that's put wood chips all around the base of the tree, just to kind of prevent any updraft or you know, any ice and things like that getting under there. Don't forget, we're outside. It's going to be winter. It's going to be cold. It's all good. So I'm going to put wood chips around the base, and then we'll move on to the next tree. I'll show you guys how to do a medium-sized tree now. This is a tree that I planted. This is, I believe it's his 3rd year. I've been treating it just like my main large tree that's over 10 years old. And we're going to do the exact same treatment to this, except on a much smaller and easier scale. So just like the other tree, what I'm doing is I'm finding the branches that I want to keep, and I'm basically bringing all of the branches to the same level. Now what I'm doing is looking for those nodes that are going to be pointing up and outward toward the sun. I don't want anything to grow in toward the center of the tree here. We're going to keep it nice and tight and small. So I'm thinking maybe like 3.5, 4 feet tall, and that's going to bring me right to there. So I'm going to keep all the branches about that height. And this tree here is that same variety that I like to call the twigs fig, because we don't really know exactly what it is. But we're thinking it's something along the lines of a Chicago Hardy or a brown turkey, or maybe something in the middle, because it does have a great Breba crop, which is pretty rare. Usually they just have a main crop. So this is a pretty unique tree in itself, and I really do enjoy it. It's been in my family for as long as I can remember. Okay, so just like that, we just cut all the branches down, brought it about to the same height. And we left a lot of the great branching, the branching that I want to see more of next year. So if you notice, there's nothing in the middle here. All the cuts and the prunes that I made, like these two right here that were growing toward the center, those are gone now. Everything is going to be growing out and away toward the main root system of the plant. So this is what you want to do when you're pruning. And now we're just going to tie all this up and wrap it with a tarp. All right, so I'm going to go from the middle of the tree here. I'm going to put my initial tie, just something like that. And then I'm just going to come around, try to hit all of the branches with this short little rope that I have. And let's see if we can't get them to kind of come together. Now, fig tree branches are very flexible, guys, so don't worry about breaking them. I know it's hard to believe, but they really don't break when you do stuff like this. But like I said earlier, you can damage the tree by pulling too hard on the rope and causing a burn to the branches, which you don't want to do. So yeah, something like this. So there we go. We tied it right up like a nice little umbrella. So I'm happy with that. All right, so this tarp is a little much for this little tree, but it's all I have. So We're gonna make it work. I'm gonna keep it folded. Start from the bottom here. Make sure we have plenty on the ground for the wood chips. And if you guys notice, I didn't use the burlap on this one for two reasons. One, I don't have any more, and I'm not gonna go out and get some just for this little job. And two, I don't really think it's necessary. Leave the top open. This is another method. This is a more popular method of doing it. When you have a manageable tree, you can leave the top open for ventilation, which is very nice. And then you could actually just put a bucket right on top of that so that you could let the air up and out, and no moisture will get down in there. So I actually did bring a bucket. All right, so bucket's on. Last step is just to tie this baby off. I'm gonna try to go around the top of this bucket like this and just tie this off first. Okay, so as you can see, I left a nice apron at the bottom of this so that we can cover that with the wood chip. So that's the medium-sized fig tree all wrapped up and ready for the winter. So as you can see, the wood chips, I might have went a little overkill again, but there's two reasons. I told you before, I like to have the wood chips there for the insulated properties, and then also in the spring, I just pull the tarp out, the bucket off, and the wood chips kind of fall over the place and they mulch the area for me. Let me know down in the comments if you use wood chips like this, and if you use this many, and if you don't, let me know why. Let's move on to the small fig tree now, and I'll show you how I winterize those because they can be really susceptible to the cold. All right, so here's a small tree, very small, that has some branching, has some bushing to it, and it needs to be covered. Now, here's a great way to do it, and just use the leaves that the tree provided for you. So these are all the leaves that fell off this tree right at the base of it. I'm just gonna kind of scoop some of these up, kind of push them toward the middle, and this is gonna help insulate that root system from that freezing cold temperature. Now, what else I'm going to do here is I have a little bit of string, some rope, and I am going to just kind of bunch all this stuff together. If you can see, fig branches are super flexible, so don't worry about hurting it. You can kind of grab them all together like this. We'll just throw this rope around it. Now we'll just take our pruners, we'll cut off just some branches that are gonna stick out. Maybe we'll take some off the top. There we go, and now we'll take our bucket. We'll go right over top of all of that like this. Maybe stuff some leaves under. You know what? Before we go and cover it, I'm seeing that the bucket, we can maybe pull some of these leaves even tighter than we had them before, so that it fits in the bucket. Now we're kind of insulating the all the branches as well with its, you know, its own leaves, which kind of seems like it was intended to be that way, right, guys? So now we'll take this bucket, just kind of force it over the top there. We don't want to hurt the tree. Just stuff as many leaves under and around as we can, kind of like that. And now what we'll do with this small tree is we'll cover around the bucket with the wood chips, just like we did with the larger and the medium. So now lastly, we'll take a brick and we'll just put a brick right on the top of the bucket there so that it doesn't blow away in the wind. And I think that this is going to be a successful tree in the spring. We'll take all this off in the spring, and this will help keep the frost and the snow off of the tree itself, which is all we really have to do in order to protect our trees for the winter. So with that, guys, we made it to the end of the video, and I have a little bonus for you, so don't go away just yet. All right, so if you guys did everything that we discussed in this video, you would have ended up with a ton of the wood that you pruned off of your trees. And now with this wood, we can actually make at least a couple hundred fig tree cuttings. What we could do with these is you could multiply the variety of tree that you cut it from just by propagating this. And I'll show you guys how to do that right now. All right, so now this is really easy, guys. So let's just say we took our cutting and we ended up with something like this. What can we do? How do we make this into another fig tree? You could pull all the figs off of it. Pretty easy to do. They come right off. These are all the dead figs that didn't make it to maturity. You end up with a nice looking branch with a top on it, somewhere where you cut it off or you pruned it off of the main tree. And what you could do is just take a, I like to measure by making my hand as long as I could go there. I come to here, that's a good size fig tree cutting. You just simply cut it like that. And now what you're left with is a beautiful fig tree cutting that you can propagate and actually throw roots in the spring, and it'll become its own plant. Now, in order to store this, we have to put it in the refrigerator, and all we do is we just rinse it off with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide or a very mild bleach solution to kill any mold spores. We then dry them and put them in the refrigerator. Take it out of the refrigerator in the spring. We're gonna just basically score like this. We're gonna expose that cambium layer, which is just that green ring. You can kind of see it around the side there, right under the bark. And that will actually heal. It'll scar over, and underneath that scar tissue will be cells to grow its own roots. And now we basically put that into the soil, about this high this deep into the soil, and it will all grow roots. This will become a new plant, and you end up with a new fig tree that looks just like this. And now this is a fig tree I did last year, or toward the end of last year, where I propagated this and put it in its own pot. Now in this pot, it has its own root system, and it all basically started from a cutting just like this. So if I put them together, you can basically see they look almost identical. Now this one has roots, and this one obviously does not. This is the one we just did. But you can make trees just like this from this and all of that just by taking the time to process them and put them in your refrigerator over the winter. So there you have it, guys. That's what you could do. That's the extra little bonus tip with all that wood that I have there. Don't throw your wood out. You could totally use it. You could make more fig trees. And then if you could find the market, you could even sell those fig trees to other people. And that's exactly what I do over here at Twigs Homestead. I propagate fig trees and then I sell them. So it's just a little option, something to think about. Something that could happen just from the waste or the prunings from your main tree that you're going to close up anyway. So some food for thought. And that concludes this video, guys. So we just wrapped all of the fig trees. We did a large, a medium, and a small, and I hope that you guys learned something or took something from this, or maybe you saw something that I did completely wrong. You're an expert fig tree grower, and you can maybe teach me something. So leave me a comment down below on what you do, why you do it, and what you think about what I do. So, well, anyway, guys, I will catch you on the next video. Have a nice winter.